I got involved in martial arts. Now I became the karate champion of Greece. I won few accolades. I represented my country internationally. I was the captain of the... What happened with me was my mother committed suicide because she was suffering from manic depression.
When we're feeling negative, whether that's frustrated, angry, resentful, whatever it might be, suddenly that conscious leadership goes out the window because we're possessed again by our default position. So I'm really interested to know, what coping mechanisms have you brought in when you're not in that conscious leadership phase?
I think we all instinctively know what is right for us, but many times we don't want to admit it because what is right for us doesn't fit. And this was the pivotal moment that made me realize that I need to accept and embrace different points of view.
Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader with me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Antonis Kocheilas has joined me in the studio today. Antonis, good to see you.
Great to see you, Andrew. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
No, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. As in all of these podcasts, I'd love to start with just finding out a bit more about yourself and where your current focus is.
Great. Currently, I'm Ogilvy's Chief Transformation Officer. What does that mean? It's a little bit more or a little bit different than being Optimus Prime, the leader of Transformers. But I will talk to you about that. I'm there to help our Ogilvy's clients to devise strategies and systems that will help them manage the future better. I'm also leading Ogilvy Consulting, the team of 250 consultants across the globe who are helping our clients to realize strategies that will allow them to have an impact in the future. This is a new role for me. I got this gig probably a month ago. Before that, I was Ogilvy's Global CEO of Advertising, which I led the modernization of Ogilvy's capabilities in advertising, branding, and content. As you all understood by now, I'm an ad guy. I'm an agency guy. I've started my career many, many years ago at the end of the previous century in a totally different climate and a totally different agency world. And I managed to, survive till now. And I worked originally in my mother country, Greece. Then I moved to the US, which I spent 10 years, 7 of them in Chicago, 3 of them in New York. And then I moved to London the last 3.5 years, which I'm now living with my wife, but always working on a global scale. So this is me in a nutshell.
Lovely. And you've done what most of my guests do to start with, which is very normal, to talk about your professional side. And of course, this podcast is really about the whole individual as well. So just give us an insight. I know you're very busy, you travel a lot, and it's very difficult to fit things in. But when you're not working and you're with family and friends and your own pastimes, just tell us a bit more about how you spend your time.
So if you ask my wife, when I'm not working, I'm boring, which means I live with my wife and I have a daughter. My daughter is 24 and she lives in Greece. My wife, thank God, lives with me. And we are global citizens by choice, meaning we have lived in many different places. As you said, I've traveled a lot. So we try to manage, this international life that seems great in social media, but in reality has a lot of challenges because, somebody, a wise man, define being in your home when life doesn't require explanations. So for the last 15 years, I'm living in a world that life requires explanations. So I'm trying to manage that and balance it with the acceleration of the new that living outside of your home and outside of your comfort zone provides. It's a constant struggle. It's never easy, but it's something that I have to say we enjoy doing. So most of my life outside of work and also inside of work, because I don't believe that you have two different selves. You are one human being. So most of my life is balancing the new with some well-established traditions that you need to keep in order to be grounded. So always striving for something new, and at the same time always trying to ground yourself in things that you believe in and things that are familiar, and that gives you a balance, I think.
Thank you. I love that. And let's take you back to your earlier part of your life. And I'm really interested in this part about how you were growing up and what was it about your backgrounds that sometimes our families, things that happen to our environment, what's within us as well, that informed that early leadership style in your 20s and 30s.
Okay. When we first discussed and you mentioned that, you made me think a lot. The answer on that, in my case at least, is simple, but at the same time, very complex. Let me try to explain. I have a fundamental event in my life that has defined me. It's a sappy story. It's the fact that my mother committed suicide when I was 13 years old. And somebody may easily say that this caused a trauma that has made me what I am today and everything. But if you think about it, and when you mention it, I thought about it a lot. Actually, it's not the trauma that makes you who you are. It's the coping mechanism that you have selected in order to deal with the trauma that defines you. Traumas, even significant ones, like the one that happened to me, are circumstantial. They happen to all of us. It's how you choose to cope with it who defines you. What we all fail to realize, and it took me decades to realize, is that the coping mechanism that allows you to survive the trauma is not necessarily, or it doesn't need to be necessarily, your default stage of being. So, to put it out in the open, what happened with me was my mother committed suicide because she was suffering from manic depression. That was back in the 80s. And of course, back in the 80s, science and society didn't deal very well with mental illness. Why? Because science didn't know enough to define the causes of a mental illness, and society considered mental illness as a taboo that they were trying to hush down, especially from a kid. And I was like 13 years old at the time, so people were very cautious not to expose me to something unpleasant. I cannot imagine what was more unpleasant than my mother jumping from a window, but that's how they thought, and for their good reasons. What this created was the need for me at 13 years old to cope up with it. So the best way that I found at the time, and it served me well for many decades, was, look, people are divided in two kinds, the weak, sentimental ones and the strong, powerful ones. And I choose to be one of the strongs because in my surrounding, the example that I have from a sentimental person, which was my mother, failed. Simplification, totally unjust simplification, but that's how the mind works. The mind chooses side. That put me, and what I'm telling you now is a few years of psychotherapy allowing me to tell it so openly, so it's not something that I realized at the time, was that it put me in a constant fight mode, because the strong people are those who are able to fight. The weak people are those who are fighting or flighting from situations, therefore they have a problem. So start growing up, the fight mode became my default state. That expressed in so many ways. The most evident was that I got involved in martial arts. I'm bragging now, I became the karate champion of Greece. I won few accolades. I represented my country internationally. I was the captain of the national team, all those things. So I became a guy who goes through life by fighting, both literally and metaphorically. As you understand, as you grow up, when you face every problem as a fight, that determines who you are. So till now, very intentional, and many people say intense in general. I am constantly striving, constantly fighting. That became who I am. Of course, as you grow older, you realize that this modus operandi is suitable for many things, and in a large extent, they brought me where I am now. You called me a successful leader. I'm happy to take it as a compliment. I don't know if it's true, but I will take it. So it brought me up to a certain place. But of course, the same coping mechanism that helped you becomes an obstacle as you find yourself in different situations that fighting is not the remedy. So I struggled personally first. When I got married and I adopted my wife's biological child and now my daughter, it was very difficult because, as you know, kids are not mini versions of yourself. They have a mind of their own. They choose to do things as they like. And when you are this fight or die guy who has learned to manage issues by sheer force of will, that is not working with your child. So I wrestle with that. My daughter taught me the largest lessons in life by showing me how this system that made me successful in the past was a recipe for total failure in parenthood. That, of course, had a reflection to my professional life because, the sheer power of will and the ability to be a solo expert, which I had became by that time, doesn't necessarily make you a leader. There is a famous in my mind at least, part of Sylvester Stallone's Rambo movie, the first one, The First Blood, who Rambo's trainer says to somebody, like, this guy is only good for one thing, war. We have to lock him on a cupboard in times of peace and open the cupboard only about war, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. So I became in organizations, and of course, nothing to do with war and nothing to do with the army. I was a nut guy. So I think that the audience will find that funny. I was a guy that it was constantly trying to do things, with an intensity that it wasn't right for the situations that I found myself in. Also, I choose a profession which I describe as playing tennis without having the right to serve the ball. Because when you are working on an agency, you are in the receiving end all the time. So imagine that this type of intensity didn't have avenues to be channeled. So I had to learn to listen, to wait, to embrace things, not only fight against things, but embracing them. It wasn't easy, and I don't believe that I have mastered it yet, but I'm working on it.
What I love about what you've shared there.
I don't know, do I make sense?
I'm just thinking now as you've shared that. So what I'm hearing is, and it's a lovely story in that sense, because I got a similar story to you in that sense of the being able to relate to work, but not necessarily a child, is your daughter that came into your life through your wife was the gift in terms of educating you on how you might need to be different in life. And then you had to start computing and working out how do I apply that in this professional context as well, in terms of what's working and what isn't working. So building on that, I'm interested, was there a catalyst within the professional environment which supported the education you were receiving from your daughter, that actually this was the time to start changing some aspects of your intensity or the way you were leading?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the catalyst was that at a certain point in my career, I had to find ways to scale myself. Meaning, when you are brought up like I was brought up, to be more fair, when you have been brought up by yourself the way that I was brought up by myself, because nobody else was responsible. My father was the sweetest man in the world. But when you're like that, you are becoming a solo operator. You are becoming somebody who can be very good at his job, but it cannot be very good working with many people or with people who are different than him. And pretty much that was my story. I was building teams of people like me, and those teams were great. But those teams could never ever be scalable enough to make a real difference. So when I found myself in positions that you either gonna find ways to scale what you bring to the table, or you are lost, or you will fail, I had to start thinking different. You know, the cliches told about leadership are true. You cannot be a leader if you don't have followers. So, and those followers need to be willing followers. If you want to scale your approach to something, you need not only to have followers, but those followers need to be willing followers. And they need to be willing not only to follow, but learn by you or from you. So in order to do that, you need to change the way that you approach things. I start accepting that people, the same way that I had to accept it with my daughter. There was a pivotal moment when my daughter, we were living in Chicago and we are ready to move to New York. And my daughter came to me and said, do you know, Antonis, I don't want to live abroad anymore. I want to return back to Greece. And that was, for me, a guy who used his clothes in order to climb outside a small market. And I was at the beginning of me having a role in Ogilvy's Global Exco. And me being, you know, the big honcho, a big wig, suddenly in the agency world and everything. And having my daughter saying to me, my daughter who, by the way, has been, was accepted in one of the best academic institutions, the Institute of Arts in Chicago, one of the best design schools in the world, with a scholarship. And the spoiled brat, I'm kidding, came and told me, all good, but I want to return to Greece because I'm not happy in the US, climbing the ladder that you are climbing and living the life that you are living. So that was like throwing, you know, a punch at me, and I was ready to start punching back. But it's my kid. I cannot punch back. I cannot fight with my kid when my kid says, do you know I'm not happy? How you can argue, how you can fight back, I'm not happy. It's not a logical, like I had the tendency, and I still have, to weaponize my intelligence and use my intelligence to, you know, put people in the corner and prove them that I'm right. But how can you do that when your kid is telling you, I'm not happy? And this was the pivotal moment that made me realize that I need to accept and embrace different points of views. That what I was looking actually all my life is not being hard. The opposite of being fragile is not being hard, is being anti-fragile, which means you have the ability to adapt better. So how I would learn to embrace and adapt in situations and grow, not fight the situation, but outgrow them, if that's a term. So that's what my daughter taught me. She was so surprised when I didn't. The only stupid thing that I did is I gave her a presentation about the future potential of living in Greece, which was an attempt, a clumsy attempt to terrify her. She started laughing and said to me, yeah, okay, Antonis, I believe that I can do better than that. And that was like when the whole family, my wife included, started laughing. And from that point on, I'm working consciously to become more open.
And what I love, that leads nicely into the point I was going to ask you around what you're describing is that agility from the way you were working before, and it was being successful, being hit in the face by this different way of actually having to be, and then behaving differently, but in a conscious way. So you're displaying conscious leadership of yourself and then others. When we're feeling negative, whether that's frustrated, angry, resentful, whatever it might be, suddenly that conscious leadership goes out the window because we're possessed again by our default position. So I'm really interested to know, what coping mechanisms have you brought in when you're not in that conscious leadership phase and the triggers are starting to happen around you in terms of that negativity driving the old behaviors? How do you cope with that?
So that's interesting, because I think not losing your consciousness, it's something that you need to start cultivating. You need to constantly remind yourself where you are, what you are doing and who you are and who you want to be. The problem is that, and I'm not condemning full-heartedly coping mechanisms because they are useful. To be honest, my coping mechanism still is a big asset of my personality. The fact that I can be intense and I can be focused and I can be, resilient. But you always need to remember that not all situations or not all circumstances are the same, and you need to be present when things happen. Again, it sounds cliche, it sounds an advice out of a yoga book, but I don't know if I can describe it better. You need to be present. You need to remind yourself that now I'm in a professional meeting, that we are talking about something that it's totally subjective and the other person has another opinion, and that's fine. It's not a matter of life and death. It's not something that you need to protect. You are not protecting somebody by holding your point. You are here to understand. You also try to understand, again overheard, but all people are fighting battles of their own. They are not fighting you. Very small are the chances that somebody is malintended.
Yeah.
Most of the times people are starting from a different context. They don't understand what you mean, or they are not in sync with what you want to achieve, or. So if you remind that to yourself, you are able to react in a far more conscious way. And don't get me wrong. If you need to fight, you have to fight. But fight only when it's needed. Don't fight all the time.
And I'm curious, in terms of your schedule, what you're talking about there in terms of presence is really important. I agree with you totally. And not all of us are very good at this, particularly when I'm at home. I'm probably worse than I am professionally. But how do you make sure that you maintain presence as much as possible? Because it's very difficult to achieve all the time. When you're busy traveling, you've got a busy schedule, you're going from meeting to meeting. How do you build that into the way that you live your life?
I don't know if I'm succeeding, but what I'm trying to do is to take one step at the time, to try to control only the things that are under my control, and to constantly remind myself that it's my choice what I'm doing. Thank God I'm quite lucky. Things in my life went well, and now I have first world problems, and I am the cause of them. I decided to follow that life. And I'm an exception because many people in our life didn't have that chance to choose their life. I made choices. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, but they are all my choices. So that's what I constantly remind to myself. I think it was Nietzsche who said, "Amori fati," love your fate. And I'm trying to remind that to myself. Sometimes I don't, like when it's 31st of May and the weather in London is like this today, it's very difficult to love your fate because I'm Greek and I'm used to sunshine. But you need to try to do that all the time.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you were saying about you've had choices and been looking around that, but just to challenge you a bit there, you were in a very difficult situation, 13, 14, 15-year-old, and you had choices then. And I think there are people out there who are in very difficult circumstances, but recognizing that they actually still have a choice. They have a choice to react to their environment, however bad that is in that time, and make the best of what they have, as you say, in terms of that kind of presence. So that leads us on to maybe some advice for everyone that's listening and watching this right now. So if they can resonate with your story, understand that they may relate to a little bit about what you've been going through in your career, what advice would you give to people out there who maybe are at a choice point now to actually choose a different kind of life? What advice would you give to them?
I don't know if I'm in a position to give anybody advices, but I think the way to make choices is complex and simple at the same time. I think we all instinctively know what is right for us, but many times we don't want to admit it because what is right for us doesn't fit what we have been taught that is right, or what we want, or what we not what we want, what we have been taught or conditioned to want, requires a lot of introspection, which can happen with help from others. So coaches, therapists, friends, mentors, all those can provide you with a reflection, which will allow you to see your true self. But also it can happen by practices, martial arts, yoga, meditation and everything. And also it can happen with a glass of good whiskey, a glass, not many glasses, but which will allow you to contemplate and think. You need that time with yourself before choices. You need to listen to yourself, what you truly want. I think most mistakes are in life in general are happening because we are listening somebody else, our coping mechanism, as we say, and not our true self. So everybody, as we grow up, we developed our own rituals to get in touch with our true selves. We need to go through that rituals again and again. Every time that it's a big decision or we are in a conundrum, let's get through our ritual, get in touch with our true selves and make a decision afterwards. And try to remind yourself what you value more. To give you an example, like I had conditioned myself valuing professional success over happiness. Or to put it more precise, I had choose that I prefer to be special than happy. And in order to be special, I need to be successful in something. Right now, I'm in a period of my life that I'm working on, and I don't know if I will ever succeed, that to remind myself that being special is one thing, being happy is another, and there is a middle ground that I define, because I'm Greek and I'm using Greek words, as eudaimonia, to be in peace with your inner demons. And that's what I'm trying to find. I don't know if I will succeed, but I refuse to be a victim of pseudo-dichotomies, being special or being happy. And you have to choose one. And I decided that I can combine them to what I name eudaimonia. And I'm striving towards that without any guarantee that I will be successful.
That's really special to hear you share that. And that brings to mind for me this other language around what you've described in terms of just being accepting that who we are is who we are and that's enough. And also that we're here to actually do something on the planet which we're either aware of or we're not. And it's about really understanding what that is. And that's what makes us special. So I love the fact that you've shared and described that.
Yes, it's exactly that. It's accepting ourselves is not a compromise. Accepting ourselves is the greatest springboard that we can create in order to propel ourselves to our true potential. At least that's how I'm thinking about it.
I agree. And that brings me to my final question. Thank you for your time today. It brings us to the springboard of your future. So obviously you've described your journey so far. So bear in mind that you're still working on it now and it'll be a work in progress for the future. What are you going to be in service of for the next 5 to 10 years in terms of your wider life?
I don't know if I will manage it, but I want to be in service of progress. I want to be in service of young people and young ideas. I believe that we are living in a world that we try to operate with protocols created at the end of the 20th century, if you think about it. All the protocols, and when I'm talking about protocols, I'm talking about institutions, values, systems, everything, was created at the end of the 20th century to solve the problems of that century. We found ourselves in an era that so many things have changed, from social dynamics to gender dynamics to technology innovation to life in general, and we haven't defined or we haven't distilled the right protocols for this new era. So at the size of my size, which is small in the bigger way of things, I want to be at service of this new thing that is coming. I think that we need to find a way to go, like I have a personal motto that I'm using in work, but I'm using it in real life. Many people are saying go back to the basics. And I'm saying going forward with the basics. How we can go forward in life, keeping basic principles and values that are timeless as we go along. That's what I want to do. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's how I'm thinking.
It does, and it's energizing, and I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. All of the people that have been listening to this or watching this on YouTube, I'm sure would have gained something to take away in the sense of how they lead themselves differently from today onwards. But more importantly, as you've suggested, using that to lead others in our lives, in our communities, in our workplaces, to give them the hope, the insight that actually we can all make an impact if we just decide to make the choices that are right for us in our life. So thank you once again for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it.
Andrew, thanks a lot for inviting me. It was a pleasure and a privilege sharing my story with you and your audience. Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.